Start with you. 10 years on, Brexit, was it worth it?
I have come to believe that Brexit represented an impulse within the soul of this nation to withdraw from what is self-evidently a failing political order.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Julian Discourse. Have you ever noticed that establishment remainers will twist absolutely any statistic just to avoid admitting that the British people were right to vote for Brexit? In this explosive clip, watch Restore Britain's Charlie Dans completely dismantle progressive activist Femi on LBC. When Femi tries to overwhelm the debate with cherry-picked anti-Brexit economic stats, Charlie calmly exposes the real truth. That GDP growth means absolutely nothing if ordinary citizens are getting poorer while the elite hoard the wealth. Hit subscribe and let's watch the Remainer narrative collapse in real time.
Good morning, Charlie.
Morning, James.
And Femi Olawole supported Remain. He then became the founder of the Anti-Brexit youth advocacy group Our Future, Our Choice, and is now an activist and YouTuber. Good morning, Femi.
Morning, James.
Thank you both for coming in so early. Charlie, I'll start with you. 10 years on, Brexit, was it worth it?
Well, to say that I was a Leave supporter is probably a bit of an overstatement because I think I was 15 when Brexit happened.
You couldn't even vote.
I couldn't even vote. I wasn't politically aware at the time. I think I was too busy playing Minecraft and Call of Duty and all the rest of it. But since then, I have come to believe that Brexit represented an impulse within the soul of this nation to withdraw from what is self-evidently a failing political order. Now, whether that was actually what it became in reality is another question, because I think the way that it was handled, particularly the way in which it was contained and subverted by Tories like Boris Johnson, it's another matter entirely, because I think it has been, in the way that it was executed, pretty much an unmitigated disaster. But
so it was a good idea but badly executed.
With that being said, again, what it represents, I think, is still very much alive in the soul of the British people and has not yet been resolved. And so in a way, Brexit is still ongoing.
So, Femi, Charlie's saying it was the right decision, even if it's been executed badly. What say you?
Just before we get, you keep saying it's not the right decision, but not done well. The leader of your party, Rupert Lowe, was a member of the Reform Party, then called the Brexit Party, and their policy was a no-deal Brexit. So when you talk about we would have done Brexit correctly, that's what you're talking about. So the question, I have three simple questions. What was the policy that the Reform Party was founded on? It was Brexit. What was the type of Brexit? It was no-deal Brexit. So the next question is, can you name a single country on planet Earth that is a successful economy that doesn't have a trade deal with any of its 30 closest neighbours?
Probably not, because I don't necessarily agree with that vision of Brexit.
Okay,
but I'm not. If you want to talk to Reform, you should talk to Reform. I'm not part of Reform.
That was Rupert Lowe's position when he was a member, when this was actually happening. So he was one of the people saying, "Oh, Brexit should have been done correctly." Well, that was his Brexit.
Yeah, well, it may well have been,
which means that his Brexit was to do something that every successful economy on planet Earth has chosen specifically to avoid.
Well,
and that can only be worse than where we are now, even worse than this unmitigated disaster that you just talked about. And that's the thing, because right now this is a closed debate. We've already all agreed that Brexit has been damaging, not just because the Nuffield Trust, the biggest medical charity in the UK, says that Brexit has damaged the NHS. The Small Business Federation says that 85% of small businesses have struggled to sell to the EU since then. The National Federation of Fishermen's Association says that Brexit has cost them £300 million. The Food and Drink Federation says that Brexit has added to costs. Morrison's is begging them to re-enter the single market to lower costs. This is unmitigated disaster on the expert level, but among voters, it's like 70% believe it's made us poorer. Even among Reform voters, they on balance believe it has damaged this country on balance on things like the NHS, on things like the cost of living. So this is over. So,
and we'll come on to all of those specific issues and specific ways that Brexit either has worked or hasn't worked. Charlie, interesting that you mentioned that you think it was a good idea, or that it spoke to something that needed to happen, or the British people needing to make their voice heard in a certain way. What do you mean by that? Because a lot of people wrote it up as kind of a big populist moment where actually people who had maybe been ignored by the political class for too long suddenly made their voice heard.
Well, first of all, if you want to discuss Rupert's opinions, you should talk to Rupert. We've had conversations about this.
He's the leader of your party.
Well, we've had conversations about this, and I think he broadly shares my position, which is that the way that it was executed was an error. Deal. So, well, maybe so. But to answer your question, James, about how this is still a kind of ongoing thing, how it represented an impulse within the national spirit of this country, I think to every hard-working, future-facing ambitious person, they can tell that this system, this political order that has existed, was constructed in the aftermath of the Second World War, is now falling apart. And that is manifesting itself in a number of different ways, chief among which is the disintegration of the borders of the countries of Europe, not least the United Kingdom, by the way, since Brexit, more than anything. I mean, the Boris wave, for example, was one of the worst manifestations of the type of Brexit that was kind of implemented. And this is because people like Boris Johnson and Michael Gove, and indeed Nigel Farage, their vision of Brexit was one of global Britain, you know, in limitless free trade between as many countries as possible. And what that led to was deals with countries like India, which carried with it visa obligations.
Again, you cannot say we would have done Brexit correctly when their version of Brexit was a no-deal Brexit, which would be even worse than what we have now. So everything you just heard, it makes no sense because the alternative he's supporting is even worse than what we have now.
And isn't there the slight risk, Charlie, that you sound a bit like people on the left who say, well, the reason communism has never worked is because it's never been done right.
Well, real Brexit has never been tried.
Is there a way of doing Brexit right?
I'd love to hear this.
I think there is, but it's quite a large conversation that I'll have to think about. But with that being said, it would have to carry with it, obviously, a complete withdrawal from the various conventions that we remain part of as a country, like the ECHR, the ECJ,
so
the UN.
War in Northern Ireland, then?
Well, perhaps, but I think that would be a grave
perhaps.
error. I mean, no.
He's saying perhaps. I say war in Northern Ireland. This guy says perhaps.
Well, no. Let me just.
This is the patriot we're talking about. The patriotic Restore Party saying war in the UK. That's fine. Perhaps maybe just do that.
Look at the way in which Northern Ireland has been essentially annexed following Brexit. I mean, this has been disastrous.
The UK annexed Northern Ireland. We are the ones who stole it from Ireland. That's the annexation of Northern Ireland.
That's an entirely different debate. I'm sure one day maybe we can do a whole hour about Irish unification, but that is a slight tangent.
But using
but
the term annex when we're the ones that stole it is wild.
It's fair to say Northern Ireland is a big part of the whole Brexit debate. Let's focus on certain issues topic by topic. Let's start. We're going to come on to immigration shortly. We'll come on to public services. Let's start with the economy because, Charlie, a lot of people would say that ever since Brexit, our economy has been impacted. Now, I would say, and look, full transparency, I voted Remain, but I was a kind of reluctant Remainer. I would say sometimes the economic effects of Brexit in a negative sense have been overplayed because if you look at other G7 nations, particularly in Europe, they have also had sluggish levels of growth and our growth has been comparable. And Femi, I will let you come back on that in a moment. But Charlie, what do you think about the economic impacts of Brexit? Have they been disastrous or have there been some upsides?
Well, it's largely, I think, it's important that we look at the way that we measure economic prosperity in Europe, in the West. And we usually use the metric of GDP, which in my view is not hugely useful because whilst GDP may have grown since 2008, for example,
What you just witnessed on LBC is the classic establishment playbook. Whenever the political elite are cornered, they immediately hide behind spreadsheets, industry lobbyists, and aggregate data to essentially tell you that you aren't actually struggling. Progressive activists love to rattle off macro GDP statistics to prove that Brexit was a mistake. But as Charlie Dans brilliantly pointed out, aggregate GDP means absolutely nothing to the working class if GDP per capita remains completely stagnant. When a government imports millions of low-wage workers, the overall size of the economy technically grows, but the individual slice of the pie for the average citizen actively shrinks. You feel that reality every single day. You feel it in the grocery store, you feel it in your stagnating paycheck, and you feel it in the utterly broken housing market. To understand the deep public frustration in Britain today, exactly 10 years after that historic June 23, 2016 referendum, you have to look at the massive political betrayal that followed. The British working class voted to leave the European Union because they wanted economic nationalism, secure borders, and an end to deliberate wage suppression. But what did the establishment do? Under the so-called conservative government of Boris Johnson, they completely subverted the public's mandate. They simply swapped the EU's freedom of movement for a global visa system that brought in record-breaking net migration, hitting an astonishing 745,000 in 2022 alone. They didn't fix the broken economic engine, they just changed where they imported the cheap labor from. The elite class hoards the wealth, suppresses wages, and calls you a bigot for noticing. Brexit didn't fail the British people. The political establishment failed Brexit by flat out refusing to implement what you actually voted for. Thank you for watching Julian Discourse. If you refuse to let the establishment gaslight you about your own reality, hit that subscribe button. Leave a like, and I'll see you next time.